goes on to fundraisers, doesn't tell anybody, and here we are. Incredible. President with COVID positive. Boris Johnson had it, President of Brazil had it. Of course, both of these, all of these, are leaders who have not been terribly serious about COVID epidemic. And here we are, and here we are. I'm going to be talking in just a moment with Michael Blake, Vice Chair of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, about what we are seeing in this election year, what we saw in the debate this week, what he's seeing in voter suppression around the country. He's out of the Bronx in New York, a New York State Assemblyman, and is in the thick, rough and tumble of all the politics that are going on out there right now. I've got some kind of crazy filter on my screen. I don't know what to do about that, but one thing at a time. One thing at a time. All right, let's see if I've got Michael Blake here. Michael Blake, if you're watching, come on in. We'll be happy to have you in just a moment here. This has been an amazing experiment in the teeth of a hurricane of news. Like, in presidential terms, I don't think anybody alive today has ever seen before. But here's where we are. Here's where we are. All right, let's get ourselves off. From Walter Reed Hospital, and not necessarily from Kayleigh McEnany, the president's spokesman. I'm not sure what to believe there. I'm not sure if I'll believe what we hear about the president's illness in the weeks ahead, the weeks leading up to the presidential election on November 3rd. I mean, this is a truly extraordinary circumstance. And there was Joe Biden, just what, 8, 10, 12 feet away from the president at the debate the other night for 90 minutes. No masks, while the president bellowed and roared and shouted there. The president's family in the hall, asked by the Cleveland Clinic doctors to wear masks, like the Biden family and guests. The Trump crew declined. Melania now also, we're told, testing positive for COVID-19. Looking to bring Michael Blake in here, New York State Assemblyman from the Bronx and Vice Chair of the Democratic National Committee. Should be with us in just a moment. Michael, if you're there, step right on up. What time did you get the news this morning? Or were you still awake last night? I think this came out before around 1 in the morning, between midnight and 1, somewhere in there. The president had called into Sean Hannity's show last night to say that he had been tested after learning Hope Hicks had tested positive, and he was waiting for the results. And then for most of us, it was what we saw on our phones, on the news. First thing this morning in our feeds, the president and the first lady testing positive for COVID. It's kind of you can tell more or less what time people get up by the time they started publicly freaking out, commenting on this. You can nail it, you can post it right there. The president with COVID. Now, we all know COVID can be light or it can be heavy. 8 in 10 of the deaths are among people over 65. The president is 75 years old. High risk factor. The president, from his own health reports, his medical reports, is obese. Higher risk factor. He could still skate somehow. He could. 8 in 10 doesn't mean everybody for death, and never mind death, just how serious will it be? And how accurately will that be reported to us? And what's going on with the chain of command in the meantime? It's a real national security issue. We are told that Mike Pence, the vice president, and his wife have been tested and have tested negative. This is good. We need some kind of orderly structure. But how do you have orderly structure in the White House when the pandemic is on the loose? If Hope Hicks and the president and the first lady are COVID positive, who is safe in a White House where mask wearing has been actively discouraged, derided? And if people are quarantining in the White House. What happens to U.S. national security, to access to the computers that give them access to classified information and communications? This is a really fraught moment, and made more so by a president who has from the very beginning done nothing but downplay this pandemic on the whole, downplay. And now we're told with what, a month to go before November 3rd? The president himself positive for COVID. Now, we're told that so far he's not suffering serious symptoms. We're told that he's on the job, that he's on top of what's happening. But we're told a lot of things by this White House. We have to hope that the leader of our country can lead the country. But we are in a mystery zone here, and it is unnerving. You have to wish health to anyone and everyone. And we do. But what a circumstance. The president was at his golf course in New Jersey after he got the news of testing positive, talking with dozens, scores of people there, sitting at a round table for an extended period. Didn't tell anybody there. These are his supporters that he didn't warn, that he didn't tell. That is pretty remarkable. That is pretty remarkable. And there he was with Joe Biden in the debate on Tuesday night. Making fun of Joe Biden for wearing masks? For wearing a mask? Acting as though that was a strange thing, acting as though Biden was, a wimp or a weirdo for wearing a mask. And now it turns out that the Democratic candidate for president, Joe Biden, standing there for 90 minutes, was not informed. His people, the vice president himself, former Vice President Biden, and his camp were not informed by the Trump camp, we're told, that the president had tested positive. Biden now being tested himself, and I'm sure those results will be coming out. But let us pray that we don't have two candidates for the presidency, both of them men of years, both well into their 70s, testing positive for COVID. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? But that's where we are. That's exactly where we are today. The President and First Lady positive for COVID-19. Let's talk about it. By the Trump White House. I'm bringing in Michael Blake from New York. Very glad to have him with us today. Michael Blake is deep into the politics of New York City, where, of course, COVID raged and raged early. Michael Blake, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Tom. What a day.
What a day. Michael Blake, New York State Assemblyman, Bronx man, Vice Chair of the Democratic National Committee, and this morning, we've been talking about it. You've seen the news like all of us, the president, and I'm sorry for this crazy blazing sun feature I've got on and I can't get rid of it.
Okay.
Never mind. The President of the United States and the First Lady reporting that they are COVID positive. Your candidate, Joe Biden, stood there on the stage with him on Tuesday night for 90 minutes while the president shouted and snorted and bellowed. Have you heard anything? You're on the vice chair of the DNC. Have you heard anything from the Biden camp about whether or not the Vice President Biden is okay?
Well, from everything at this point, our vice president seems to be okay. Of course, he and Senator Harris and others have been tested. I saw some commentary earlier today that Senator Harris came back negative already. We're waiting on Vice President Dr. Biden itself. And, there's a lot of mixed emotions right now, Tom. Right. So I put this as someone who I had the honor of working for President Obama and Vice President Biden on both campaigns and in the White House. Mm-hmm. And I represent the South Bronx, which literally was the epicenter of COVID and COVID-19 from a death rate, from a small business impact, et cetera. We're still suffering right now. And so you have on one side you immediately pray for the president and his family. I'm still a person of
Have
faith.
have to.
But we can't ignore the absolute irresponsibility that he and his administration have demonstrated. And I just, you wonder about those that were in the hall in Cleveland earlier this week.
Yes.
You wonder about those in New Jersey.
At the President's
you wonder
Golf
about the
Club.
people at the golf club. You wonder about the individuals who, that they were around, that they knew that he and they knew that he was positive, and it continued anyway. And so, I give credit to Jennifer Jacobs and those at Bloomberg for reporting it. And you wonder where would we be if someone would have communicated it. But it's a surreal morning. It really
Can you
is.
imagine, Michael? You were there in Iowa in the Obama campaign when they brought that home. I want to talk about that, how that worked, and where that state stands today. You were there in the White House. Can you imagine working in a White House, which has responsibility for the leadership of this country and the national security of this country, in the midst of a pandemic that's raging so large in the White House that Hope Hicks, the president himself, the first lady are all testing positive? I mean, the national security advisor was on Air Force One with him, and his chief of staff was on Air Force One with him as they flew for the debates into Minnesota as well, I think. How do you run a White House where there's a pandemic kind of running wild?
Well, you think about, we did have to prepare and had to go through a process within the administration ourselves. And, we handled it quite well, right? Because we were aggressive and we were responsible.
You mean with the N1, S1, whatever it was?
H1N1, and
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when you think about, from all the different, you always have to prepare for a pandemic, right? You always have to prepare for that in that leadership role.
That's what public health planning is.
Absolutely. And, something that Chairman Tom Perez always would say from his days as labor secretary.
Yeah.
He said, when you serve in an administration, you can change things at scale.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in that same manner, it's that level of responsibility. And, yes, people should wear the damn mask when you're out, and be cognizant of the bully pulpit, and even Tom, think about this, earlier today, you had Mark Meadows, chief of staff, did a press conference without a mask on.
Today. And he was on Air Force One with the president.
He literally said that you saw him coming out from the White House, and people were asking, well, why? Well, I had been tested and I came back. But again, it just doesn't make sense given the magnitude of the moment. And I think it's important here that we balance out the next 30 plus days.
What do you mean by balance out, Michael?
You have, first and foremost, a country to run.
Mm.
Right? And so, the protocols needing to be in place of a president that should be and needs to be in the quarantine now for 2 weeks if they do this appropriately.
At the very least, and for all we know, he could end up in Walter Reed in intensive care. I mean, it happened to Boris Johnson.
We got to be responsible about this, right? And then the fact that they did acknowledge he had mild symptoms. I think, again, unfortunately, we do have to wonder about everything being said. So what does that mean? What does mild symptoms mean? And so first, in terms of administration, what are you doing to run the government while the president is quarantined? Mm-hmm. Who's doing what? How do you prepare for that? Second,
we're not going to hear that. They're not going to be straightforward about that. They have not been straightforward about anything, as far as I can tell.
Well, true, but here's the challenging dynamic now, right? Like you can't run from this now, right? Pence has to be tested. The chief of staff, others have to be tested. Not the RNC chair saying they were positive. So now you have to do contact tracing. You have to. You can't say I'm not going to tell you results at this point. Like now. How do they responsibly do that after results is something we're going to have to push on, all of us. But then it impacts also the campaign, right?
Sure.
There is supposed to be a debate coming up. How do you move forward in this way? Yes, they were 12 feet apart in Cleveland. What
But we
happens
know
for
that when
event?
you're inside 6 feet, I mean, even outside 6 feet is really a minimum. We saw 18 feet might be necessary in new research a couple of weeks ago, but they were 10, 12
Absolutely.
feet apart. I really worry about Joe Biden.
And I think, this is the overarching element that we now have to assess. Given what we've learned in the last 10 hours or so,
Yeah.
How do they campaign for the next 30 plus days? And I think, and the irony of this, I was running for Congress. We came in second early this year, but things happen. It's okay. I'm still serving in the assembly right now through the end of the
Bless you.
year. And we had to make a decision on, do you campaign actively or do you help your people while they're going through a crisis?
Because you were
And
running out of the Bronx, where, as you say, it was New York City's epicenter, and New York had it bad.
literally, it was the epicenter of what's happening here. And the challenge, though, they can't stop campaigning for the presidency in the next 30 days.
Well,
You got to do
if
it
you're flat on
differently.
your back with a ventilator, you're not campaigning personally for president.
Individually.
He's not, but he could be.
Yes, exactly. And I think individually, this is what I say, where things have to be completely varied now, right? Trump and Pence and Biden and Senator Harris, obviously, this dramatically alters what they may be personally doing. But the campaign apparatus of virtual phone banks and virtual offices and text banks and all these activities become even more apparent and more necessary now. And lastly, the elements on both sides, administration and campaign, around misinformation, disinformation, and communication become even more paramount.
Well,
Because think about how many people, Tom, truly thought this was a hoax.
Well, yes, and I think people are justified in being skeptical about reports that come from the White House briefing podium. It might be
Absolutely.
different if it came from the chief doctors, career doctors at Walter Reed, but
Absolutely.
the president has such a plain record of misrepresentation on so many fronts that you can't blame people for being skeptical, even about. I saw lots of commentary that, does he really have it, or is he looking for a way out of this campaign? Is he looking for a way to something to blame his loss on? I mean, it sounds irresponsible and heartless to repeat those things, but if we didn't have a president who had stated so many myth-truths, that impulse wouldn't be there in this way. But now in social media, you can just imagine, I'm sure it's out there already, all the speculation will be going on. Mild symptoms, what does that mean?
And I think I was just sharing the post so that more people could rock with us right there.
Great.
It's I think about my mom. My mom is 74 years old, and she's down in Florida. Was up here with me for 2 months because of what was going on in Florida.
Yeah.
And we spoke for a while this morning. And one of the things that she said, which unfortunately is true, is, well, can I believe what comes out of DeSantis? Can I believe, because it's not even just the president, it's all the others.
It's her governor.
Florida. Absolutely. Governor of Florida, who have communicated this messaging and this framing.
Yeah.
So now you're really wondering, okay, can I trust it? And that is devastating for democracy. That you're actually wondering, can I trust that the president of the United States and the administration are being honest with me about a deadly pandemic? And I don't want to make this too overtly political in the comment I'm about to make, but we can't ignore the reality we're in.
Go for it. It's a political season, and your district was hit as hard as any district, any population in the world.
Yeah, we're literally this is one of the reasons why Vice President Biden has made COVID relief and COVID response the cornerstone of this campaign. And I think you have to really ask yourself, who do you trust to handle a crisis? This is not going away anytime soon. And Axelrod will always tell us, David Axelrod always tell us on campaigns, a campaign is about choice and contrast. Well, now you have a pretty blatant choice and contrast, ladies and gentlemen. Like you're watching this in real time of an individual, the president of the United States, who consciously knew he was positive and around other people that were positive and did not tell people.
And who mocked his opponent on Tuesday night for wearing a mask.
For wearing a mask. For wearing a mask. And whose family and staffers that travel with him, while yes, they walked into the arena with a mask on, they took their mask off while they were sitting there. There's the interview that you saw that Don Jr. did with Hannity afterwards, no mask on. And so
and the
all
Cleveland
these
Clinic
elements,
doctor asking them to wear masks and then being waved off by the Trumps. I mean, come on. But we can make it personal. We can make it about that small arena that night, though the whole country was watching. But as you know best of all, and that's part of the reason we've got you here, because you're from COVID Central in New York when it was raging there. It's not just the Trump family. It's not just the Pences we should worry about. Those families in your district that were hit by COVID, look at the leadership that was absent in setting this country up for success in combating it. There were many, many lives lost. Of course, we hope that the Trumps do fine out of this at a human level, but the responsibility, as you say, is huge here, and thousands, 200,000 plus lives have been lost. The president may be spared. We have to hope so. It's just human, but many have not, and that's been his leadership that has put us here.
I think about my friend Ezekiel Cousins, 46 years old, who texted me earlier this year when he was a Verizon employee, CWA union man, was concerned about having to get on the train and be around because people were testing positive and they were getting sick.
Yeah.
And from
so
that
that's like 19,000 Amazon workers have gotten COVID this year. So he, like them, working man.
So, working man. And then, unfortunately, about a month later was gone. Right.
Yeah.
And 46. I mean, that's a baby. Right.
Yeah.
And so, you think about how many kids we had to delay the opening of schools twice here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
The restaurants that are afraid they may not come back. 40% of black businesses closed forever.
Well, not forever, we hope, but closed in a way that's pretty deadly. Once you're closed.
Unfortunately, of the current stats, 40% have said they've closed and they are not returning. They may return as a different type of business.
Yeah.
Different, but like what they were doing, they're not coming back as they were. And so, this is a very telling point. And I think when it comes to the moment, for those of us at the DNC, and I'm grateful being vice chair of the DNC, first black man elected since Ron Brown, that this is not just about the presidency, which is obviously critical. This is about the U.S. Senate races, which should take even heightened intensity. Think about how, Amy Coney Barrett, they're like, okay, Supreme Court, nominee they're putting forward. Now you got to do contact tracing around there, Senate races there. The U.S. House, think about this today. People thought that this was crazy to even talk about, Tom, but you have to internalize this all now.
Okay.
Don't forget who is the third in succession. Is the Speaker of the House.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the magnitude of today, the state house races, shout out to Jessica Post and DLCC and all that they're doing there, because of what you have to prepare for, given the voter suppression tactics that have been happening and electoral college dynamics you have to prepare for and electors. We have really awakened not just to a health crisis, but a reckoning on democracy that we need to take seriously.
We're in it. It's happening. It is very, very real. I think human nature wants to normalize, but this isn't normal. We are way out on a limb here, and pray to God that we pull it back and get things back on an even keel. The country was watching last night. It seems almost petty now to think about the debate, but there it was, and it was not insignificant, and it was not unrelated to what we've now learned. You were watching too, I'm sure.
Yeah.
The president with that off the rails performance, defying every agreed to guideline and rule for how the thing would run, but that was kind of the least of it, given the volume and the kind of maniacal bully bellowing that was going on up there. Joe Biden, yeah, there are moments when I wish it was Joe Biden of 10 years ago with a little quicker step, but he was steady through that. He he kept his footing. Not easy for a man with a stuttering background. We know that, and under that kind of attack, he held it together. I thought pretty well. He made some good statements in the midst of it. Again, I wish he was a little. I wish he was a little sharper in his step there. But what do you make of how that played out, and what the impact of that grotesque display is likely to be on the race?
Well, one, that was not a debate. That was a man in Joe Biden, our vice president, former vice president, but I still call him our vice president, speaking about his vision for the country and the direction he wants to take the country.
Mm-hmm.
And an individual on the other side yelling, shouting, disgracing the office, lying, denigrating, but for the purpose of distracting. Because I think we have, I always try to make sure I focus on, as David Seamus would tell us often, find your why. Why would Donald Trump, why would a sitting president do that for 90 minutes? Because we ended up not talking about any of the substance from that debate, Tom. We have been talking about Donald Trump and the noise and the chaos.
Instead of what?
Instead of his complete failure on COVID response, his complete incomprehensible desire to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act, the disaster of the economy, the lack of a plan when it comes to reopening of schools. What are we doing for Black and brown and women-owned businesses? We literally walked away and for 2+ days have been talking about the absolute absurdity of Donald Trump and the noise he was creating. And so now we have a moment, once again, to pause and have to reflect on why. And you think about this, Chris Christie and others communicated, they had debate prep. This is not a shock approach on what was happening on their side. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. And so you
think this is what Chris Christie asked him to do, advised him to do?
I think, again, we can't put anything past anyone else in that room. It is hard for us to believe that this was not a plan, given 90 straight minutes of it.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump's plan, maybe. I saw Chris Christie say afterward that the president had gone way too hot. But again, here we are talking about the president being hot instead of, as you say, all the real material issues that are in front of us right now. I don't see the approach changing under President Trump if he got a second term. What about Vice President Biden on the stage that night? He had to face a kind of volcanic onslaught. At times he was pretty poignant in his response, but what impression do you think people will take away? Will it work for him? Will it bring people to the polls?
I think it will. I think it will, because I think what you see happening, as you saw in those immediate snap polls, that on the substance, it wasn't even a question who was more substantive and who had a clearer direction. I think for the next 30+ days now, and that debate was a clear indication of it, and the news of today is another reminder of it. We have a choice as Americans. Do we stay in this disastrous haze of lack of leadership with no plan? Or do we make a conscious change for humanity and to build back better? I mean, it's truly what's at stake right now. Because again, if you are a sitting president, it is implausible that you don't have something to communicate. It is a choice that you want to distract people from what have been your approaches and your responses, as opposed to Vice President Biden. And what can he say now? He can remind people that he and President Obama came in during an economic disaster and led recovery, that they implemented an Affordable Care Act, that they want to make sure that we're going to help our small businesses. Like a very clear contrast now. And to me, you now have the unfortunate reality that we're going to continue to spend time in the next 2 weeks at a minimum talking about who knew what around the Trump world, when did someone get tested, what was going on there, which will be distracting from his record.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to see how being COVID positive helps his reelection effort.
Because, and I think, and again, I want to be very clear as I go back to the top. It is not about, obviously, you want for the health and recovery.
Yeah.
But we have to be honest about ourselves now. What is going to be the narrative? It is going to be around what happened, the story, the information that, as we should be finding out. The challenge is it makes it very difficult to have a very direct contrast when that's happening.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, you may be right, but you could hardly have a clearer demonstration that the president has failed on COVID-19.
Oh, yeah.
If he can't even keep it out of the White House,
No one's saying that we can't say he hasn't failed. I think we all know he's failed, right? I think I'll treat it like this, Tom. Would you feel comfortable if someone attacked a loved one of yours if they were sick, regardless of the merit, right? And I think those are the
you can't attack Donald Trump because he has COVID? Come on, I think he's a big boy. It's too late for that. He's president. He had responsibility for keeping this thing down when there was time. And when we could have, I mean, we're the worst in the world by a long shot. I just got back from a month in Germany. People are living normal lives there compared to us. Kids are in the streets walking to school with backpacks on. It makes America look like a hellhole, and it's embarrassing, and it's tragic. It's tragic.
Yes, but Tom, think about this. People were pushing back on being critical when he wasn't COVID positive.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So I think the framing of there's a group of millions of people that he literally often said this was a hoax, this is not real, ignore what's happening out there. And in the midst of that, every time you were being critical, the response was stop. Like that you're just trying to play political games.
I got no time for that. The evidence is on the table in front of us.
It is.
We've got a rate of COVID in this country, and it's going back up again. Now we know it will in the winter. It will elsewhere as well. But our death rate toll here has been hideous and tragic, and it didn't need to be. We're the richest country in the world, and it's just outrageous. Now, the decision still has to be made. And here you are, Vice Chair of the DNC. We see these polls all over the country that show Biden doing very well, but we all had the experience in 2016 that showed Hillary ahead, and she lost. What do you see when you look? What do you hear? What do you see? What's your gut about where this race actually stands? We had 538, Nate Silver's outfit saying Trump had a 20% chance of winning. And to some, that may sound comforting, but if I told you had a 20% chance of driving off a cliff today, that would not be very reassuring. What do you see? Where are we?
Well, it's dramatically different. Biden is in a substantially stronger position for many reasons. Number one, he is significantly higher in the polls statewide and nationally than Secretary Clinton was at this point. Mm-hmm. And notably in the states of concern. I mean, we're talking about states like in Iowa, which Trump won by 10 points on election day, that are tied right now, right? When you're looking at some of the numbers itself, and there's room for growth. I want to be very clear. There's more room for growth around Black voters. There's definitely more room for growth around Latino voters. But Biden is further ahead. Second, Biden has essentially been hovering around 50% pretty consistently. And one thing we all recognize, a sitting president, it is hard for undecideds to really break towards an incumbent because they already know that person. More than likely, they're wondering, do I want to vote for the challenger? Do I want to break for the challenger? And so if you're in a space where you're essentially at 50%, if you have undecideds that break, more than likely, they're going to break for the challenger because they already know who's the sitting incumbent that's there. Third, you have an apparatus right now where, 2016, I said often, could they have done more modeling and figured out some more senses of Black and white and Latino, et cetera. Yes, I hear that.
Yeah.
However, I don't think you're going to have anyone let up at all this time. You know, I think before you had a momentum and a feeling of, okay, this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
We're rolling. You know, 2016 is that shock and awe of, okay, I'm going to run through the tape here. And equally, Tom, when you have a scenario where Trump has been so blatant, as have other Republicans, around not being not only complicit, but active around voter suppression tactics.
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
You know, you think about
unbelievable in Texas, what's going on right now. Just unbelievable.
Texas yesterday was just unreal, but yet not surprising, unfortunately. So what does that mean? That means you're even more vigilant going in. You're even more aggressive going in.
Yeah.
You know, we have about 2,500 new volunteers a day joining the campaign. You know, we have an active presence. You know, we see this around 17 states itself. And we're not just relying on just one or two. We're going to be very aggressive across the board. And then lastly, when we talk about now versus 2016, you have an effort that's mobilizing across the board where Black, white, Latino, Asian, LGBT, independents, moderate white women are all breaking towards Biden. And there's a very clear argument now, and this kind of goes back to the core of our conversation.
Breaking towards Biden? You telling me that Black LGBTQ wouldn't have been in the Biden camp in the majority from the beginning?
You would have it as Democratic voters and Democratic alliances.
Yeah.
However, there are still conservative faith voters. That, you know, choice is still a relevant conversation. There are still
hotter now than ever. Yeah.
Of course, that criminal justice, because of the crime bill and because of Senator Harris's background before, that made people be hesitant. You had many that before COVID, the argument being made by Trump was the economy and that you're making money and you're doing well.
Yeah.
So you truly had to make the persuasion argument. It was not just come home for me because you're a Democrat or you're Democratic leaning. I need to make the clear point to you as to why you should be voting for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And so now those elements are at play. I had someone say to me earlier this week, well, I'm not really sure about criminal justice because of Kamala and Joe. And they said in that formal way. And I said, well, you meant to say the vice president and the senator, first of all. And then second, help me to understand this. You're more concerned about what they did 20, 30 years ago versus a man who did not denounce white supremacists on stage.
Yeah, boy, we all heard that loud and clear. Michael Blake, New York State Assemblyman, Bronx man, Vice Chair of the Democratic National Committee. There's so much I want to get to with you. So much. And I want to get to exactly that point about white supremacists and stand back, stand by. I have to ask you a kind of fundamental thing here, though, about the support for Trump. You were there with the Obama campaign when they took Iowa. You were in the heart of that campaign. And then here you come. And in 2016, as you say, Trump took it by 10 points. How do you interpret that swing? You were there when Obama took it by storm. We all watched as Trump took it by storm. That seems just like polar opposite outcomes. What happened? What was that vote about? Why did the Democrats lose that big majority in Iowa?
Well, I think, one, you had a once-in-a-generation candidate mobilizing coalitions.
When Obama won?
Yeah, totally. You know, that we can't ignore. You had an element in 2008 where ending the war and getting health care were mobilizing factors for a lot of people. We also spoke actively about rural issues, farmers. You had the support of Governor Vilsack, who obviously has been very engaged in so many different ways. You had a lot of elements that created that firestorm, while on the other side, in 2016, you had a scenario where Trump was essentially saying, don't trust these systems. These systems are failing all of you. It's time for just a radical shift on what has to happen. And people operate out of fear when it comes to the economy and what's happening in their communities. However, now, again, and we go back to COVID, we go back to healthcare, we go back to the justice conversation.
Yeah.
How many of these farmers are like, wait a minute, I lost everything because of the disastrous policies of Donald Trump?
Now, we talked to Chris Gibbs last week in Ohio, farmer there, just livid about Trump's trade policies.
Yeah. And so, and that's why I always go back to choice and contrast. You have the elements here, and now you have Vice President Biden who can directly say to you, whether if you're in Iowa and Ohio or anywhere across the country, it was his job to lead the recovery of this country. I mean, that's a pretty powerful argument when you start the conversation, right?
Yeah.
It was his job to get the votes for the Affordable Care Act. So it's pretty impossible to say this man is not ready to lead us out of a disaster, right?
You worked with him. You worked close. You worked with him. You worked with the president. Does Joe Biden still have the oomph to get it done? Has he lost a step? Does it matter? Will he be surrounded by enough people? And I say this with respect, but I'm just watching. He's 78, is not a young candidate. Does he still have it? Does he have the energy to get it done?
I think on Tuesday night when he called individual one a clown, right? I think when he told him, "Shut up, man," and that you're the worst president ever. I think, with a lot of restraint, right? And
he can get his back up. We see that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the humanity of Joe Biden to me, which is evident for so many reasons. Donald Trump was talking about Beau Biden, the vice president's late son, and then Hunter Biden with just utter disdain. And for the vice president to be able to take that, turn that back around, and then look directly to the camera, to the American people, that's the kind of person I want to rock with. Right? That's the kind of person I want as my president.
Yeah, I don't think anybody
he has it. I think to your question, that showed he has it.
Well, he's got humanity, and he's got. It would be easy to be drawn to his instincts, I guess. And compared to Trump, as Buckley said, open the phone book, and we might be better off at this point, at any point. But
and then he left the debate. And then what he did a train store. He did a whistle stop store.
Yeah, I know. But at the cabinet table or in the planning meetings, is he? Here you have Barack Obama, you worked with, who was 40 when he took the presidency. That's very different than being 78. I don't know when Joe's next birthday is, the vice president's. But in those kind of meetings,
I would say, let's look back at, we obviously lost a legend recently in RBG. She was pretty damn good in her 80s, right? So I just think at the end of the day, it's important. And I hear the question. I appreciate the point from everyone, because I think it's the broader context of, is this person ready for the job in this moment? And I just think in the same way I tell people, let's make sure we're not ageist. Let's make sure we're not discriminatory in that manner. Is Joe Biden ready for this moment and ready to lead? Emphatically, the answer is yes.
Stand back and stand by. And the president's refusal to condemn white supremacy. You've been a big surrogate with black audiences around this country for Joe Biden, with young black men in particular. I mean, it was a shocking thing to see the president communicate in this way. But then, as you said before, you can't exactly say it's surprising after Charlottesville and all the rest. How does that go down in the black community? Does it make people turn away and say, wash my hands of the whole thing? Does it bring out voters? We've seen the video out of, where was it, Kentucky, where you had a armed black militia marching in the streets? Does it get people in fighting mode? How do you see that being digested, received among your neighbors and black constituents?
Yeah, that's the reality. You're angry, you're pissed off, you're disgusted. But I'm not surprised, because it's Donald Trump, right? So he has demonstrated who he is. I tell people, why are you surprised when you think about the familial history? Where when his father was sued for not letting black and brown people get access to housing, when Donald Trump took out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty of Central Park 5, when you have family members of Trump that are listed in KKK writing. Again, this is not us making this up. These are factual elements that have been demonstrated and proved. So I'm not surprised when he talks about stand back and stand by to the Proud Boys, because this is who he clearly demonstrates he aligns with in that mindset and that approach. But now, what I have said often is turn your anger into action, right? That at the end of the day, make more phone calls, donate more money, make more text messages, sign up for voter protection efforts.
Yeah.
You know, because at the end of the day, you know, victory is your sweetest revenge, right?
Yeah, no question. But who knows how that will all unfold? And I want to talk about that. We've seen here, I'm talking about black militia video. I've seen a lot more white nationalist, supremacist militia gangs, whatever you want to call them, in the streets with guns and tactical gear and all the rest. Give me some inner narrative. When you watch that, when your black and brown constituents watch that, see that, this is not hypothetical now. And it's not some old, video clip from Klansmen riding horses a century ago in the movies. This is on our streets right now. And you've got the president saying, hey, get in there on election day and be poll watchers. But it sounds like very close to being poll intimidators. And if there's a dispute over the election, that stand by is very easy to interpret as stand by to bring out your AR-15s and get in the streets and get busy if they try to deny me a second term.
That's exactly it. And I just think we need to be that direct that is what happened. That was a call to arms, a call to action from Donald Trump. That was him saying.
I'm hearing that as a white guy. How do you hear that as a black guy? Maybe it's just the same. I mean, I'm so pissed at that. That's nowhere near the way our country ought to be going. But I'm still a white guy listening.
Well, I think we all hear it, and we heard the same things. However, the feeling, though, you have to make the decision. Are you more determined to go out? Or are you afraid? And let's be very clear, that is an intended result of that language.
Yeah.
Where, let me continue from a Donald Trump perspective to create more fear, more hesitancy, more reluctance. Don't trust the mail is what he's telling you. Oh, and then you want to go outside? Well, I got my guys ready. And they're not going to be accountable.
They got guns.
Big gun, and everything's going to be fun. And so for him, Donald Trump cannot beat Joe Biden if we show up, period. And that was a clear approach of, I am trying to scare you to not vote. And so when you think about the moment that we're in, it makes me as a black person even more determined to run through walls for Biden and Harris, because you have, let's just call it what it is. You have a white man on stage telling white supremacists, hey, be ready. Be ready for me to give you the signal. You know? And if we are silent with our action, we're giving the oppressive victory. And I refuse to allow that to be the case. And that's what has motivated me and so many others even more recently around that. And I think this is less about the person that was already going to vote for Biden or the person that was already going to vote for Trump. This is for the independent that's watching today, that's still making their decisions. And you really have to ask yourself, even if you're not black, do you feel in any way safe and secure that the president is telling white supremacists to stand back and stand by for the intent of creating chaos?
Wildly the opposite. I mean, this is a nightmare scenario. It puts goons and bully boys and all kinds of armed wackadoodles in the streets, empowered by a message from the president of the United States, potentially to act, when you've got this guy already in Kenosha, and who we now see that there was a memo that went out from the DHS telling their people to be supportive of him when they talked about him.
Yeah.
No, this is not a good future for our country. I don't care what color you are. This is a deadly future for our country. Michael Blake is with us. He's state assemblyman from the Bronx. He's vice chair of the DNC. If you're watching, you know this is live, and we welcome your comments. Here's Kim right here. Says, great conversation. Glad these conversations are back. So am I, Kim. If you've got questions or comments, type them right in there. We'll see them on the screen, and we'll grab whatever we can. Michael, let's go to the voting time. Now, people are voting already, and it's no longer voting day. I mean, there's a lot of voting underway right now.
That's right.
There's a lot of controversy. The president's putting out all this persiflage about how it's going to be a fraud, which seems a setup to deny the outcome. How do we get to how do we get across the chasm of the election without crashing and burning in there, given the way he's trying to frame it and whip up fear around it? How people say, well, it's got to be a landslide victory. That'll take care of everything. Do you agree? How big a victory will it take to roll over all this hooey from the president about fraud? And if it's not that big a landslide, what kind of tangle could we get into?
Well, I think we're clearly in a scenario where we need to make sure to demonstrably turn out in large number and prepare for all different scenarios, which we will and we are because of our voter protection teams. And I do not believe at all.
Wait a minute, what's a voter protection team? Are you sending out armed people too?
No.
What does it mean? What is a voter protection team? That's a new language to me.
These are lawyers. These are volunteers who are operating hotlines so that when you hear of a problem, you can actually call on a hotline to follow back up. This is.
But you don't mean squads on the ground, or do you? You don't mean
no,
like...
I'm not mentioning armed militias out there.
Okay.
This is individual volunteers across the country that are lawyers and non-lawyers alike to make sure that people are actually able to vote and assessing what's happening here. Then we can actually make some progress in that way. But in the framing of this, yes, this is a voting season. We are past this just being a one-day occurrence. And Virginia and North Carolina are already voting now. I actually have a Virginia call to jump on in a few moments just to check in on some updates from the team. Right.
Yeah.
And this is a broader opportunity. So for everyone watching, iwillvote.com. iwillvote.com. That is the website we want everyone to be utilizing for the next 30 plus days to find out, no matter what state you're in, your information in terms of voter registration, voter education, early voting, absentee voting. And also, if you want to be a part of voter protection efforts. And to Kim's point about Philadelphia, obviously, Philadelphia and Pennsylvania at large are very important to all of us for many reasons as a critical battleground state.
Alexander saying the more people tune into these kind of conversations, the more America can reconnect with its identity, with its best identity, not its worst. So iwillvote.com. You're encouraging people to go there.
Yes, absolutely.
In the Bronx, what's the feeling right now? Is COVID going to keep people home?
I think what we're going to have, I don't think it'll keep people home. I think we're going to have a massive uptick in early voting. I think that's what's going to happen. And I think that's going to be the case across the country. I think a lot of people are going to make the conscious decision that they're a little reluctant around absentee voting, right?
Yeah.
And they
because the president has cast so many aspersions on it.
Yeah, well, he cast aspersions on a lot
messed
of things,
up the post. Yeah, messed up the post office. Michael, what's your advice if it gets? Because I don't know when we'll next talk with you, but when November 3rd comes, if it gets crazy, what's your advice to people? If it gets just nuts, if they see people being intimidated at the polls, if they see armed people on November 3rd or later, marching around insisting that it's Trump when the numbers may say otherwise, if it gets crazy, what's your fundamental advice to people listening to Americans about how to handle it?
Stay engaged. Don't walk away. Trump's trying to create chaos so that you're not involved. And if you really want this, you're gonna have to fight for this. You're gonna have to volunteer. You're gonna have to donate. You're gonna make phone calls. You're gonna have to text. You're gonna have to stand in line a little bit longer. You really gonna have to want this because, and again, I go back to where we started at the top, that while his health condition, yes, we need to pray for his healing and pray that he's doing well. But there's a lot of people that are dead. A lot of businesses not coming back. A lot of kids that are not in schools because of the disastrous policies of Donald Trump. And they're showing you they will do anything to stay in power. Whether it be what happened in Texas yesterday about having just one site per county,
to
whether
drop
it
off
be making
ballots.
water,
Yep. And these are counties with 2,000 square miles.
yeah, it's just
big
unreal. It's just not even feasible everywhere. To the pushback that happened in Wisconsin about trying to extend the deadlines. I mean, this is an intentionality from a lot of people that they do not want you to vote because if we vote, we win. And so I would say stay engaged and stay committed and realize, so many things have happened for us as a people. Walking away is failure.
You're not too many miles from AOC's district. Is the AOC wing going to come on board, come in? The Bernie people, the left of the Democratic Party, will they be there in multitudes or?
Oh, absolutely. That's not even a question. Absolutely. I mean, this is not even. It's not even an alternative, right? So yeah, I mean, so I think there's always different policy positions, always different feelings that exist. But at the end of the day, we're going to be a united Democratic front because we all understand what's at stake here.
Are we going to get there, Michael? I got to let you go in a moment, but are we going to get to the United States of America that accepts its diversity and becomes great, really great, not this kind of white supremacist backsliding? Are we going to get to the other side of this?
We've overcome World War. We've overcome Civil War. We've overcome Jim Crow. We've overcame slavery. We've overcame Vietnam. We've overcame the assassination of Dr. King and RFK and JFK. We've overcame all these different elements that have existed. And while the institutions are still struggling, if we overcame those things, we can overcome Donald Trump.
Michael Blake, he is state assemblyman in the 79th district in New York in the Bronx. He is vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, and he is up to his chin in this right now, and we're glad for it. Michael Blake, it's been great talking with you. You're terrific. Come again. Talk with us again. We'll talk with you. We'll see what happens when all this comes down and check in with you. Thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom, for using your platform for good. Really grateful. And again, everybody, iwillvote.com so we can bring this all home. Thank you, everybody.
Michael Blake, great to have you here. And for everybody listening and watching out there, it's great to have you with us. This is kind of homespun. I've got on some kind of bright as the sun filter today that I couldn't get off. Forgive me for the details, but I think the conversation, the real heart of it is what we're here for. We love your comments on the screen. Keep them coming, and we will bring them in more and more as these things go forward. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Tom Ashbrook with AshbrookLIVE. We'll be back next week. Thanks a lot for being here. Stay strong. Don't be freaked out. Stay steady. Be engaged. It's our democracy on the line. Watch for the facts and dig them out, whatever it takes. Michael Blake, thanks a lot. You're the man. Take it easy.
Thank you.